What if the information you believed to be true about Joshua Brown was actually incomplete? Rumors have been circulating for months that his actions ought to have had dire repercussions. Nevertheless, he managed to leave unharmed. The startling accusation is now coming to light. Was Joshua Brown safe? Not because he is innocent, but because of his extremely prominent persona. This discovery might upend everything you believed you were aware of privilege, power, and the tactics used to stifle controversies. Conversations concerning Joshua Brown were muted and even reluctant when they initially began, as though no one was truly interested in believing what they were hearing. He wasn't just another Planet Shakers employee or musician. People would see him on stage, grinning, laughing, and belting out upbeat tunes. He was a symbol of worship and delight for many. However, there were times when people felt uneasy behind the scenes. Some actions went beyond what ought to have raised red flags, especially when directed at young guys. They seemed to fade into silence rather than being spoken candidly. And more than anything else, that quiet sparked curiosity. For what reason was nothing being done? The stranger the more people dug. It appeared. Was this actually a shield for Joshua? If so, what is the reason? Some thought it had to do with his sexual orientation. In addition to exposing his behavior, the aim was that confronting him would force the church into a contentious public discussion about homosexuality, something that big organizations frequently made a valiant effort to avoid. Others said the leaders were just trying to preserve their reputation. Planet Shakers was more than simply a church, after all. It was a movement and a brand that had an impact on thousands of people worldwide. Leaders frequently balanced the cost of the truth against the cost of their reputation, and scandal could harm that image. Joshua's situation stands out as the annoyance of those who felt disregarded, yet all too frequently, notoriety triumphs. Employees had voiced their concerns. They had observed actions that seemed off. But nothing significant happened when the matter got to Pastor Russell Evans. The reason wasn't ignorance. It was a decision. The decision to take no action. And since dealing with Joshua may open doors the leadership didn't want to go through, rather than because he was innocent, that decision created the appearance that Joshua was untouchable and protected. Silence may be as loud as a shout in religious societies. Leaders send a clear message when they do nothing. A few individuals are too significant and well protected to be held responsible. Not simply the victims or the worried employees are hurt by that message. The entire congregation's confidence is shaken as it spreads. People start to question if they're prepared to keep silent about this. Are they concealing anything else? Joshua's reputation is not the only thing on the line. It's the church's own credibility. It is unsettling and illuminating to consider that sexuality could serve as a shield. On the one hand, it demonstrates the reluctance of many churches to publicly address LGBTQ+ issues. On the other hand, it implies that leaders may choose to defend their image over their people when given the option, even if doing so puts them in danger. This dread and silence left Joshua without any accountability. He continuing to serve and perform even as the number of questions increased. People were aware that the pattern wasn't new as more stories surfaced. The similar pattern has been seen in scandals involving ministries all across the world. Early warnings, disregarded grievances, leadership protection, and, ultimately, public indignation. The narrative of Joshua Brown fit right into that pattern after the truth could no longer be concealed. He avoided repercussions when they were necessary by remaining silent until the murmurs became too loud. I would never wish to bring him into disrepute. He was, in my opinion, a marvelous man of God. He obviously created a fantastic network. God made great use of him. He saved a lot of lives. However, the one flaw he seemed to have was that he wanted to protect the billion-dollar enterprise at the expense of my daughter. Of course, he had one moral fault, which was definitely my mother's. The circumstance is particularly difficult because confidence was betrayed. People go to Planet Shakers in search of protection, hope, and healing. Parents bring their kids. Young folks worship with all of their hearts. Additionally, employees commit their life to serving. It's difficult to rebuild trust once it's been damaged. Individuals start to wonder if they can truly believe in the leaders who say they are their guides. Additionally, the pain drives some people to completely abandon their faith. Despite being a single individual, Joshua Brown's story highlights a more significant issue. It's not just about him or what he did, it's also about the culture that shielded him with quiet. Silence ultimately does more than only conceal the truth. It undermines the fundamental principles that a church is meant to uphold. It's also difficult to rebuild that foundation once it cracks. One of those cautionary tales that serves as a reminder of the perils of silence when warning indicators are disregarded is the tale of Pete and the Lamb family. Red flags existed long before Pete was linked to Daystar and the Lamb family. He didn't have a perfect past. His actions raised questions in circles that most people had never heard of, and his reputation had dark spots. He had a distinguished financial background, but when he was accepted into one of the most powerful Christian families in America, it didn't seem to matter. Additionally, their choice to embrace him without sufficiently questioning him paved the way for a scandal that would eventually upend their entire existence. In actuality, there had been attempts to raise the alert. Concerns were expressed, letters were addressed, and certain Christian leaders were informed of concerning trends. According to reports, a thorough letter describing Pete's aggressive advances and troubled sexual past was sent to Pastor Russell Evans himself. However, the letter was buried rather than igniting an investigation or establishing accountability. Nothing was done. The quiet was overwhelming. Furthermore, the appearance of success was more important than the reality, as is frequently the case in influential ministries. Leaders decided to ignore Way, believing that the empire would be safe if the issue was ignored. It was actually the one thing that would make it weaker. The lack of openness has detrimental effects on the Lamb family. One of Marcus and Joni's daughters, Rachel Lamb, was never given the whole story. She was not informed of Pete's history or his inclinations. She wasn't ready to confront the dangers that others had already recognized. By retaining her in the dark, she was let down by her family. It wasn't only a mistake. Both as a parent and as a spiritual leader, it was a disastrous failure. The ministry's reputation was prioritized over protecting her, which should have been the top priority. The stillness spread out in the same pattern. When members of the inner circle voiced concerns, they soon discovered that their opinions didn't have any influence over the must maintain Daystar's impeccable public image. Openly interrogating Pete would include interrogating Joni, Marcus, and the ministry as a whole. Many employees and supporters felt betrayed when they spoke up. So, despite growing suspicions, they remained silent. Pete was able to gain the family's trust in the ideal setting because to that culture of quiet. Protected by the Lamb's name and the holy atmosphere surrounding the ministry. Realizing that there were warnings but that no one took action is devastating. This story hurts much more because of that. It was feasible to be accountable. It would have been possible to include safeguards. Pete might not have had as much access to those in danger. Rather, every opportunity to act morally was dismissed. The Lambs' allies were endangering their own family and supporters by ignoring the warning signs, even though they may have believed they were defending something holy. The ensuing scandal didn't happen overnight. Years of carelessness were to blame. Every caution that went unheeded, every voice that was muffled, and every investigation that was not conducted added to the wall concealing the truth. Furthermore, it was too late by the time the facts began to surface. The harm had already occurred, not only to the family standing but also to the faith of thousands of others who regarded them as spiritual leaders. The familiarity of Pete's narrative is what makes it so terrible. One man and one family aren't the only ones involved. It concerns a culture that prioritizes reputation, power, and influence over people's safety in many megachurches. It concerns leaders who persuade themselves that keeping quiet is sacred and that concealing the truth safeguards God's work. In actuality, though, it merely makes more space for danger. Pete's actions became unavoidable for Jonathan and Susie Lamb. They raised their voices. They resisted. And even at great personal expense, they would not remain silent. At first, they were portrayed as the bad guys, liars, or rebels against their own family because of their readiness to reveal what others were concealing. However, they weren't merely creating noise, as evidenced by the appearance of letters and first-hand reports from individuals like Jonathan Weiss. All along, they were speaking the truth. However, the plot is still haunted by those earlier missed warnings. Because a great deal of suffering could have been prevented if something had been done when they first emerged. Ultimately, Pete's association with the Lamb family is a tale of lost opportunities. Leaders had the opportunity to take action, to be open, to safeguard their flock and their loved ones. They decided to remain silent instead. Instead of putting forth the effort to be accountable, they opted for the easy route, the polished image, and the impression of togetherness. And the price of the truth's eventual revelation was much higher than anything they had attempted to avoid. Pete will constantly be reminded of the neglected warnings surrounding him. Ministries are not protected by silence. They are destroyed by it. The truth does not cause families to disintegrate. Because the truth is kept a secret until it blows up, they fall apart. Furthermore, the repercussions for the Lamb family was more than just a personal issue. A public controversy exposed the perilous consequences of prioritizing power over people. Megachurches are now a powerful force in contemporary Christianity. Every weekend, they attract thousands of people and broadcast slickly presentations to millions of people online, and they frequently resemble entertainment centers more than places of worship. They are dazzling from the outside. The leaders appear untouchable, the music is expert, and the structures are well maintained. However, the story behind that well-preserved image is frequently quite different. A tale in which preserving one's reputation comes before integrity, responsibility, and even the individuals who contribute to the church's identity. In actuality, megachurches now use their image as currency. In the era of social media and continuous publicity, leaders are aware that appearances are more important than ever. Every outreach program, worship set, and sermon is thoughtfully chosen to convey a sense of blessing and achievement. To be fair, image isn't necessarily a terrible thing. It has the power to uplift, draw, and inspire. The issue arises when maintaining the brand's cleanliness takes precedence over confronting unpleasant realities, the pursuit of that image takes the place of integrity. We have witnessed this repeatedly. A controversy breaks out. Perhaps sexual misconduct, financial mismanagement, or power abuse. Initially, rumors begin to circulate among employees or insiders. The tendency of leaders is to rapidly shut down the issue rather than deal with it. Attorneys become involved. PR departments craft well-crafted statements. Pastors also reassure the congregation that all is well. However, the one thing they hardly ever do immediately is to be completely honest. Even if it involves hiding or stifling those who voice their concerns, the picture of unity and holiness must be maintained. This brand protection culture isn't a coincidence. Many megachurches are constructed with it. Questioning a single leader who is seen as the visionary or the head of the selected figure is akin to questioning God. That's risky. It fosters an environment in which criticism is viewed as treacherous and accountability wanes. Employees who voice their opinions risk losing their employment. A congregation may be branded as divided if its members ask too many questions. It's an obvious message. Avoid upsetting anyone. Don't ruin the picture. However, much though it may seem secure at the time, silence always comes back to haunt these missions. Scandals are not always kept under wraps. When the truth is eventually revealed, it is typically much worse than if the church had just been truthful from the beginning. It is quite impossible to restore integrity after it has been damaged. The public begins to view the church as another organization that is more concerned with wealth, influence, and prestige than with people or God, rather than as a lighthouse of faith. The leadership is not the only thing harmed. The church's regular members feel deceived. They invested their time, money, and trust because they thought they were a part of something honorable and pure. Their confidence in the church and occasionally in Christianity itself is shaken when they learn that authorities have concealed misconduct. Youths in They leave with the conviction that the church is nothing more than the deceit they witnessed behind the curtain. These ministries wind up undermining the very trust that kept them afloat in their attempt to preserve the brand. The fact that this pattern has become so predictable is among its most terrible aspects. Numerous well-known pastors and ministries have demonstrated this. The leader initially exudes charisma. The church expands, the media coverage and the influx of donations seem like evidence of God's favor. Cracks, however, are appearing behind the scenes. Perhaps the leader has a luxurious lifestyle. It's possible that staff members are crossing boundaries. Perhaps funds are being misappropriated. The church strengthens its image rather than filling in these gaps. Do not criticize the man of God. We must safeguard the ministry. We're being attacked by the devil. These expressions are employed as a means of avoiding confronting reality. However, the truth is that concealing the truth should never be used to defend the ministry. A genuine ministry that is based on integrity can withstand challenging inquiries. It can withstand repentance and confession. Lies are what it cannot endure. When leaders prioritize their image, they lose the same basis that initially provided them such power. Integrity and credibility are not flashy. Great PR isn't always the result. It entails owning up to mistakes, taking responsibility, and occasionally relinquishing authority. However, it's the only way a ministry can stay genuinely strong. All that remains when integrity is compromised is a show. And a show inevitably falls apart, no matter how brilliant it is. Megachurches have the capacity to accomplish amazing things. Their influence, platforms, and resources have the power to transform communities and lives. However, they will continue to fall into the same trap until they realize that honesty is more important than appearances. Instead of bringing people closer to God, every cover-up, disregarded warning, and well-crafted statement that conceals the truth serves to drive them farther away. The decision is straightforward in the end. Integrity or image. One endures for a season, while the other endures forever. Megachurches that prioritize appearance may expand quickly, but they will always be afraid of the truth. Even though they may experience hardships, churches that choose integrity will weather any storms. And this is what the scandals of the past several years have taught us. The truth always surfaces. The only question is whether the world will reveal it to leaders or if they will disclose it themselves. When scandals start. One question constantly comes up in ministries when leaders are removed from their pedestals and secrets are brought to light. Now what? It's simple to get sucked into the drama, the accusations, and the rumors about who knew what and when. However, there is something greater and more significant at the center of it all than a single family, church, or scandal. It's the demand for genuine change and accountability. History just repeats itself in the absence of those two factors. In actuality, trust is based on accountability. Without it, it is impossible to establish a church, a ministry, or even a family. Cracks show up when leaders profess to serve God but dodge difficult topics. People start to question whether the goal is to defend an empire or to serve Christ. And regrettably, in a lot of instances, the empire triumphs. The truth loses value in favor of the church's prestige. However, that way of thinking has caused innumerable people to feel wounded, deceived, and to wonder if faith is truly real. The demand for accountability goes beyond merely penalizing wrongdoers. The goal is to establish a culture in which reality triumphs over appearance. When leaders realize that acknowledging failure saves the ministry rather than destroys it. Consider it. People typically don't turn away when someone comes forward with honesty, owns up to their mistakes, and accepts responsibility. In actuality, they frequently admire that kind of bravery. People leave because of hypocrisy. The person who hides abuse on Monday is the preacher who smiles on Sunday. The leader is the one who defends wrongdoing behind closed doors while preaching purity. Faith is shattered by that. Actual transformation. Include abandoning ministries that are based on personalities. Megachurches and media ministries have been centered around one charismatic person for decades. The issue is that accountability vanishes when everything is dependent on one individual. When the leader makes a mistake, who corrects them? Who poses the challenging queries? Too frequently, nobody. Loyal friends, relatives, or benefactors who don't want to stymie the financial flow make up the majority of boards. And sway. Establishing structures where leaders are not untouchable is necessary for true transformation. It entails solid procedures for dealing with misbehavior claims, independent boards, and true financial transparency. And let's face it, change also entails changing church culture. For far too long, criticizing a pastor has been equated with criticizing God. That must end. Leaders are not divine beings. They are human, and like everyone else, they can fail. Because of their power, they ought to be held to an even higher standard. Accountability entails establishing safe spaces where individuals may voice issues without worrying about being silenced, humiliated, or fired. It entails hearing what whistleblowers have to say rather than dismissing them as resentful troublemakers. Transparency is another aspect of genuine transformation. It is insufficient for ministries to claim that God is aware of the truth. The truth must also be known by the public. Don't use well-written press releases to conceal charges when they arise. Avoid manipulating them into making nebulous claims that errors were committed in order to shield the guilty. Keep your mind open. Give specifics. Tell the truth. If something occurred, admit it. Allow a leader to resign if necessary. Although they can seem protective at the time, cover-ups only make the fall more difficult later. Additionally, the demand for accountability extends beyond the leaders. For the Christian community as a whole. All too frequently, churchgoers unknowingly facilitate cover-ups. Because it is simpler than confronting the reality, they attack victims, blindly protect leaders, or turn a blind eye. In order for there to be genuine change, believers themselves must demand better. Don't take justifications. Holding leaders accountable is actually a part of safeguarding God's work, so don't fall for spiritual manipulation that claims that, if you question the pastor, you're hurting God's work. Sin can only proliferate when there is silence. Real accountability comes at a price, too. Donors may stop supporting ministries. Churches might get smaller. Leaders may resign in shame. But compared to the cost of silence, that cost is much lower. Lives are destroyed, families are split apart, and faith is lost when victims are disregarded, the weak are left exposed, and the truth is suppressed. It drags the gospel itself through the muck. Although it may cause pain in the short term, true accountability eventually heals. It reconstructs. Have faith. It eliminates corruption. It also serves as a reminder that human empires are not central to Christianity. It has to do with God. Recent scandals have demonstrated to us that the traditional approach is no longer effective. The truth cannot be permanently concealed by damage control, secrecy, or image management. It will always be exposed by independent journalists, social media, and brave insiders. The church has two options: either choose honesty to overcome that, or continue to be exposed until nothing remains but rubble. In reality, the demand for accountability and reform is a cry to return to the fundamentals. It was modeled by Jesus himself. He led an open life. He chastised leaders who prioritized show over fairness. He spoke about hypocrisy and whitewashed graves that were lovely on the surface, but inside, they were rotten. Churches must take that message seriously once more if they hope to survive. They must quit acting as though defending a brand is equivalent to defending God's kingdom. Furthermore, a single scandal or apology is insufficient for reform to be genuine. It can't be a stopgap measure till people forget. The way ministries function must undergo a long-term change.